Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name's Joe Kuzma, and I am joined once again by my brother from another mother, Mr. Brian E. Roach. Brian, what's going on, my friend?
Brian E. Roach is happy today. Brian E. Roach feels good today.
Oh, now, come on now. See, folks, you wouldn't know this, but I screwed up. I almost started talking in the third person like a Benny Snell or like, you know, for my wrestling fans out there, The Rock back in the day. And now Brian's going to tease me about it. Sorry, I screwed up my pronouns here, Brian, but if that's what makes you happy in our first post-season edition, or off-season, I should say, because the Steelers aren't in the postseason, but I guess we could talk and make some predictions too, but we have some important fish to fry here, and a lot of that has to do with some entitled spoiled brats, also known as Steelers fans. I guess I'll put quotations around fans. I would assume that most of the folks who listen to this program aren't latching on to some of the filth that's put out there in Pittsburgh sports media by people who don't care about Pittsburgh sports media, and you know the names. I don't have to drag them out, but it seems like they just come up with some topics just to have hot takes, to get listens, and they put a lot of just dumb ideas in people's minds. I think a lot of other people just aren't aware of football, either, you know, NFL rules, how the calendar year goes, league structure, or anything. Logic. I don't even know that they watch the games. We're going to peruse social media and we're going to make fun of these people, but we're going to give some there's a couple of things that come up and people latch on to these, you know, arguments or statements, and they debate, and some things can go either way. And, you know, even myself and Brian may not always see eye to eye, but there's some like really ridiculous stuff out here. So if you're wondering why the title of this episode is Stop Being Stupid, Steelers Nation, it's because we're telling folks to stop being stupid, in particular the guy who thinks that the Steelers will fall behind the Ravens and Browns in the standings this weekend.
Yeah,
because they're not playing any more games, fella. I mean, they can't get any worse. It's mind-blowing to read some of the things that people put out there. And you know what? I particularly don't know where to start. We were thinking about going through some of the positional groups, and we'll see how much we could kick into this show and under an hour for this one, and then come back to you early next week. Since we got to come up with things to talk about, we'll probably talk a little bit about the games this weekend too. But aside from that, I think the best place to start is coaching, because, you know, heading into December, I think everyone was ready to give Tomlin the Head Coach of the Year award. And then all of a sudden the Steelers fizzled and went 0-3 to finish the season. And I think a bunch of people who just look at the record and want to be able to brag to friends and wear cool black and gold, outfits, maybe around their workplace or around other people. Maybe they have other people in their family that are like Raiders fans or Browns fans or something. They want to poke fun of them. The Steelers aren't in the playoffs, and they're mad, and they just don't understand. And because they need to vent their frustration, that means now they want to fire Mike Tomlin. They want to fire everybody, Brian. I don't understand some of this. I guess the most idiotic one, that the argument that comes out here is there's this. I believe this was on like The Fan or something in Pittsburgh, and this come around, and you know, I even get it sometimes. I got to calm people down in my own family that latch on to these arguments and start it's like I have to defend. I get put in a position where I have to defend Mike Tomlin, and I'm like, why do I always end up in this position? I feel like almost like a broken record each year, especially this year. I mean, we're talking about, you go back to this position last year. Okay, the Steelers missed the playoffs. They had a good team. Once again, a slow start, right? Hold on, I'm bringing it up. I remember it wasn't necessarily the way they wanted to start. 1-1-1, right? 1-2-1. Tying the Browns, who were previously, you know, didn't win a game the year before that to start the previous season in 2018. And a lot of people were mad. They didn't realize maybe the Browns improved a little bit. They get, you know, different things were going on there, and they were mad, and then all of a sudden the Steelers end up 7-2-1, but at times it still wasn't good enough, you know what I mean? And then they lose 3 in a row to the Broncos, Chargers, and Raiders, and then all kind of hell is breaking loose, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, Antonio Brown goes missing, and they weren't able. They had this whole Le'Veon Bell fiasco, and there were all these distractions, right? And that was the thing. They were going to get rid of all the noise in the offseason. And I remember when they traded Antonio Brown for a 3 and a 5, and everybody's like, oh my God, I should have been able to get like 2 first-round picks for him, and all this other stuff that was going on. And it was just, this team is going to be terrible and everything else. And yeah, okay, they were 8-8. I think everybody forgets what happened where Ben Roethlisberger got hurt too, and somehow even the guys that we said in the offseason, hey, the Steelers are going to be all right. They got Juju coming in for AB. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 now. He's strong. He's young. All these other things, and then all of that, you just wiped the slate clean. All that went out the window too. It's that meme where the guy throws the plate down the hallway, and they still finish 8-8. So it's just like, what the heck do people want here? Are you understanding what Mike Tomlin had to work with? And are you understanding, like, the job that he actually did this season, that 8-8 is respectable? Most teams would have packed their bags in week 2 had they lost their franchise quarterback.
Yeah, this is the job Mike Tomlin did this year is somewhat skewed by the fact that at some level, the play of the players, which the coaching has only limited impact on, right? You can see when they don't do the right things and they don't put the players in the position to succeed, or their technique issues. But, Devlin Hodges throwing interceptions, that's not really Mike Tomlin saying, hey, you know what? I don't want to win. Let's throw interceptions because why not? We feel bad for the Jets and whoever else we're playing. At some point, coaching is no longer the issue, and it boils down to the fact that when you have players who aren't at the level of other players, you're going to play badly. And that happened a lot on the offensive side of the ball once Ben Roethlisberger went down. We had moments where things looked good, and then you have moments where they don't. And it kind of comes back to, you can only do what the players allow you to do. And I find it interesting when, in Tomlin's press conference, when he was asked about, Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, and he said Mason is the backup, period, and he didn't really speculate on Devlin. And I look at this and I think to myself, all right, we bemoaned the fact that they just would not go over the middle of the field with Devlin Hodges. The passes just did not occur. And when they did, it usually ended in a bad result. Now, you got to start to wonder at some point, is that some kind of indication of something they'd already seen in practice, and that they knew this was a limitation of this guy? And hey, you know what? You're midway through the season when you finally need to use him, and you're starting, and you can't really do much else. It's not like there's a plethora of quality quarterbacks running around, tending bar and doing things.
There's not. They just can't go and get somebody else's quarterback like off their roster. Like they should have traded for Teddy Bridgewater because the Saints weren't without Drew Brees for a portion of this season and needed a quality quarterback. No, he's totally available.
Yeah, it's just silliness. And so at some point it boils down to that. And I look at this season as it's disappointing because whenever you get to the point where you have a chance to get into the tournament and you don't make it, it feels you feel that sting, right? As Tomlin said in his presser, he's numb because it's so close and they work so hard to get there, and it just doesn't happen. But at the same time, what they managed to pull off this season with what they had to work with, I think at this point we can all agree the trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick was a solid steal. Not like a steal with lowercase letters, as you put it in the back rooms of SU. Steal in a capital, all caps, screaming at the top of your lungs kind of steal. The pick that they would have given up is the 18th or 19th pick. I can't remember which one, the pick that they ended up trading, or the value of that pick. And you're not going to get Minkah Fitzpatrick at that point. or a Minkah Fitzpatrick type caliber player. This is a top 10 kind of guy. And it clearly had an impact. And now you've got a defensive backfield that's set for a good long portion of time. Helped improve the defense to the point where they really were, making turnovers, doing a lot of elite level things. Pulling that off, and then at the same time managing with an offense that scored, and this is for the season, 28 touchdowns. 28.
Yeah.
That's not a lot.
No, it's really not. And you kind of jumped the shark on several things I was going to bring up. This is almost like the if there was like an Orthodox Festivus, like a week later, like the Chinese New Year's, like a week later, a month later, or whatever. It's like, I got a lot of problems with you people, and you're going to hear about it. And I got to go back to the coaching, but you did touch on. Well, we got to touch on the quarterbacks too, but I mean, that was one of the things is, hey, look, they should get somebody else and this and that. And it's like, they're trying to coach around the inexperience of some of these guys. And I'm not ready to throw, anyone under the bus, and everyone that's saying, cut this player. We'll come back to the positions. I want to go back to coaching for one more minute here, because this is the one that's really irritating me. It's the Tomlin won with Cowher's players. And that's one of the ones that really gets under my skin, because what did Cowher do in his last season? Does anyone remember?
8-8.
I believe so. I got it right in front of me. I mean, I don't have to cheat, or I am cheating, but yeah, 8-8. After he won the Super Bowl, they had a major hangover, and then even more so. Tomlin takes over the first year. It's not like he won the Super Bowl. They lost the wild card. What was that? To Jacksonville. And they were 10-6, so they had to improve from there. You're now the third season is when Tomlin wins the Super Bowl after Cowher had 3 seasons later. That's an eternity. We were just talking in the back rooms too. Go back and play like Madden 17 and take a look at that roster versus what you're playing with the newer games or something. It's night and day. It's a lifetime. 3 years is a lifetime in the NFL. 4 years, 5 years, these teams don't even look the same outside of a few players that may have the longevity of, it depends on the position. I guess if you're offensive lineman, defensive lineman, quarterback, if you're a good one, even if you're a bad one, really, you may hang around the league for 10, 15 years. But running backs, wide receivers, I mean, the window is short for these guys. Cornerbacks can end up in the same kind of territory. Maybe safeties might last a little longer. Linebackers. I mean, some of this depends wear and tear on your body, how much you play, and everything like that. But just generally speaking, and if you're a kicker, you play until you're 60, apparently. But it blows my mind, because if you go and you compare those rosters, it's not like Mike Tomlin had the bus. You know what I mean? You look at Ben's early numbers, and I'm going to get into that with the quarterbacks, but just based on the coaching, I mean, there were different things that had to be done with Tomlin. Tomlin was playing running backs by committee. Santonio Holmes came in when he was a first-round pick who didn't see a lot of playing time at the wide receiver position during an 8-8 season under Bill Cowher. He then flourished and had the big Super Bowl moment with Mike Tomlin. You got guys like Lawrence Timmons or Lamar Woodley that weren't even around. And I mean, I could talk till I'm blue in the face, because all of those names, we've turned that already over again, and Tomlin's dealing with newer guys like T.J. Watt that has come under his umbrella, or whoever else, Minkah Fitzpatrick, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, geez, do you remember Rashard Mendenhall? That was short-lived. Le'Veon Bell, he's already out the door too. So, I mean, this turns around rather quickly, and you just can't, like, sit on your butt and be on autopilot as a head coach. So when somebody comes up and says, well, Tomlin's failed to win a playoff game in 9 out of his 13 seasons, and they say, oh, well, they're like, not bad. Well, they try and make it sound like that's absolutely, the worst thing in the world. Let's look at this objectively. How many coaches are going to win a playoff game this weekend? 4. There are 8 teams that are playing this weekend. There's 12 that get in the dance out of 32. Okay, you got 4 teams on bye. So the maximum amount of coaches that are going to win a postseason game here in part of the extension of the 2019 season. I know it's 2020, but this is the 2019 season. The maximum amount of coaches that are going to win a playoff game right now, 8. And not all of them will, because some of these teams are going to lose this weekend. They might lose next weekend. You may have a team that comes in off the bye, maybe one of the 4, that loses right there. They don't get a win. So you may only have 6 coaches who win a playoff game out of 32. a maximum of 8. That's how rare it is to win playoff games. We're talking about like tenures and how long coaches have been around in the NFL, and you talk about some of these guys. Who's been around longer than Mike Tomlin? We said like 2 guys, right? I mean, I guess Andy Reid, but not in the same position. So he's one. Bill Belichick, Sean Payton, few others almost in the same category. Who'd we say? Jason Garrett, Pete Carroll. I mean, that's about it. You got like a handful of guys that have had whatever success. You look at some of these guys. Mike Tomlin they played 15 playoff games over 13 years. That's what you're not missing is when you say he didn't win one 9 out of 13 years. Well, out of those 13 years, there's only the 4. Hold on, let me rewind this a little bit. So out of 13 seasons, you're saying, well, 9 of them he didn't win a playoff game, but how many times did they go to the playoffs? They went 9 out of 13. You got to flip that around. It just so happens to be the same number, coincidentally. That doesn't happen too often. And I got some other guys, Brian, I'm still here. I'm not running out of steam just yet because I'm pretty PO'd about all this stuff. I went and I pulled up some stuff. I got to go grab it now. I had to screen capture it because there's so many things I've been grabbing for this. I told you I got a problem with you people, and you're going to hear about it. So Andy Reid, has only won 2 playoff games in last 6 seasons as the Kansas City head coach. They should just fire him right away. You think they're happy with what's going on in Kansas City or not? I don't know if they have these same arguments. The Seahawks, since they won the Super Bowl, Pete Carroll's only won 4 games last 5 years since they won the Super Bowl. So they've been mediocre ever since, too. I mean, okay, I get it. You look over the last 5 years, Tomlin has been in 6 he's been in 6 playoff games. They've only been in the postseason 3 times. They've won 3 of those 6. Overall, out of 15 games, he's 8-7, okay? Let me pull some more names out. Sean McVay. Everybody's got, you were talking about being on jocks. Remember during the offseason, one guy was always like, you're on this guy's jock, particularly Steven Nelson. And we were correct on that, by the way. So everyone's favorite heartthrob. They went from the Super Bowl to nothing this year. They had to start paying some of these young guys too, like Jared Goff, Todd Gurley, and that's going to affect what they do with other positions on their roster now. We'll get to that when we start talking about Ben's contract. And did you know with Bill Cowher, he only won 3 playoff games over a 7-year span before he won his only Super Bowl? I mean, they should have got rid of that bum, too. Sean Payton's only won 4 in the last 6, so he's like right in the Tomlin category also. And guess what, Brian? What do these guys all have in common? They're considered the best coaches in the NFL or at their profession at whatever time they were coaches. And there's so many more I could throw out there. I'll wait. I'll let you opine before I give my other stuff, because there's some Hall of Fame coaches that line up with Tomlin, too, and it really ticks people off when I bring them up.
Look, I get it. I understand at a certain level that Steelers Nation, as you called them, and as I have called them many times, are a bunch of spoiled brats. That's what happens when you have the kind of success that this team has had. And, I also understand that expectations from the top down of the Steelers franchise are always championship level. But you have to temper your view of what is realistic and what is your ultimate goal, right? And it is not realistic that the Steelers will be in the playoffs every single year and will win the championship every single year. That's not realistic. As I've said many times in the past, if that were to occur, it would be the end of the NFL as we know it. But
wait. You mean to tell me that multiple teams don't win the Super Bowl each year? There's only 1 out of 32? Nonsense. Come on, man.
Yes.
Come on.
Only 1.
Need mid-season awards or something. Let's do what the NBA's doing and do a mid-season tournament, too. Or have
while, yeah, 50, whatever.
50 bowl games. Everybody gets 50
bowl games. Look, and you talk about participation trophies. While I understand it's not acceptable to say I'm content being 8-8 every year, because you shouldn't be. All right, and we're not, and by no means am I saying Tomlin is 8-8 every year. But you have to understand you're not going to win all the time, and even with the caliber of players that they have, all right, they're not going to win all the time. And whether it's a good game, whether it's a bad game, whether there's a slow start, whether there's a fast start, whatever the circumstances are, there's always something that can go wrong. And the term any given Sunday is a viable term, because on any given Sunday, things can go wrong and you can lose. Even if you shouldn't, even if it's a team you should absolutely dominate, you can lose.
Like the Miami Dolphins?
Miami Dolphins.
Took the words
and
right
the
out
New
your
England
mouth.
Patriots. Yes, you did. It can happen to anybody. I doubt anybody is screaming for Bill Belichick's head because the Dolphins beat the Patriots. Oh my God. And yes, he has a little bit more cred under his belt, but nonetheless, it's the same concept. All right. It still fits across the board. And so, I get it. I understand the angst and the desire to win and the disappointment. But at some point, you need to temper it and understand Mike Tomlin is not a bad coach. Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the NFL. And, whether or not he's giving you everything you need, as a fan, you could be in a lot worse shape. And let's just live with what I don't want to say live with, but let's understand what we have and be appreciative of it as much as we can be, even in bad situations. I'm not, I don't, as some of the Twitterverse would say, I don't worship at the foot of Mike Tomlin, right? I understand his strengths and I understand his weaknesses. And I think overall, we're pretty lucky that he's still the head coach. I would like to have more out of it.
Here come the trolls, man. Here come the trolls.
Yeah, I know. They're going to come. I would like to have more championships. I would like to have more rings. But, look, you've also got a unique set of circumstances where you've got, gosh, it's going to make me vomit in my mouth to say these things. You've got two guys on a certain team, the same team that just lost to the Dolphins, that are a once-in-a-lifetime pairing, and they've dominated not just the Steelers, pretty much everybody else for the past 2 decades, on and off. And look, when you run into that, guess what? Sometimes it's not so bad when you end up being the second best or the third best, which over the last decade, guess which team has the best record? Obviously the Patriots, but the Steelers are third in that list, tied at number 2 with the Packers. So you've had a lot of success over that same time frame, and you got to accept that's just real world stuff. You can't always assume you're going to win every year.
Well, not only that, Brian, but I mean, that's kind of how the Rooneys have always looked at this too, is keeping, the system in place. And, this is the blueprint from Chuck Noll. He was the architect of all this, and Bill Cowher carried it on for many years. But how many times did Bill Cowher lose an AFC championship game? He went to 6 of them and lost 4 of them. And, Tomlin most recently lost the one in 2016 and, kind of willed their way there. And they were running on fumes, too, in one of those, too, when they were lost, like Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. And then they didn't even have D'Angelo Williams. It kind of shows you that the coaching's there, the structure's there. Some people were thinking, well, maybe they do better with another coach. You don't necessarily know that. I think Tomlin. I think that you could put the stamp on it right here. Is look at Antonio Brown. Where is he? Bill Belichick couldn't even handle him for very long, and he was sent packing. John Gruden couldn't handle him at all. And somehow they kept the lid on this thing for how long with Mike Tomlin as his head coach. And of all the things, Antonio Brown, he continues to take shots at, Juju or Ben or whatever. You don't really hear him say anything about Mike Tomlin, do you? I don't ever hear him say anything about Mike Tomlin. Just goes to show you. And a lot of players, if you look at their, comments or whatever, whether, current players probably aren't going to talk about their coaching and organization as much as former players. Former players talk up Mike Tomlin quite a bit. But I wanted to go back because I love making the arguments too about, how good is Tomlin, this and that. And this can be a whole other episode on its own. Go back and look at John Madden. I just want everyone to take an example. Now, I understand Madden won a lot of games. He coached 10 years. He was one of the guys, I think there was like 4 guys, maybe Tomlin was the 5th, that had 100 wins in 10 years, and John Madden was one of them. I think Joe Gibbs maybe one, Don Shula, guys like that. Hall of Fame coach, right? John Madden. Yep. John Madden inherited a team that had won the AFL championship under John Rauch. John Rauch. And this is... he coached there like 3 years, but this is the same like Tomlin type argument. He took a team with the Raiders, they went 8-5, 13-1. They lost to the Packers, I think, in the second Super Bowl. I think that's when it was. And then 12-2. And then John Madden takes that over, and, they were almost always, perennial kind of in the AFC title picture or whatever, and, the Steelers were a major thorn in their side. And Madden's still considered one of the greatest coaches of all time, but he couldn't get over the hump, could he, against Chuck Noll. This is the same thing with Tomlin. You take Tomlin, okay, he took some of the talented team, some of the roster carryover from Bill Cowher. That was a championship caliber team. He can't get over the hump with Bill Belichick. And if you even look at it, what did I say? I had Tomlin's up a minute ago. What did I say? 8-7, 15 games, playoff record. Let me see. Where is my buddy? Oh, I'm looking at Rauch and not John Madden. That doesn't help. I'm going to pull up John Madden here. And Madden is 16 games, 9-7 all-time playoffs. Now, granted, they didn't have as many teams in the postseason back then, but still, I think it's just kind of interesting to look at that. And, of course, Tomlin's over 13 years, Madden over 10. But, these are guys that were like, assistants or coordinator positions that moved up to the head coaching ranks and had success. And I know that's going to tee off a whole lot of people saying that kind of comparison, but hey, it kind of, the shoe fits there. There's other guys like Tony Dungy that really match up real well too. There's guys in the Hall of Fame like Marv Levy that never won like anything, 4 straight Super Bowl losses. These are all great coaches, and all of them have their strengths and weaknesses, as you were mentioning. It's just one of those things is kind of understand where you're at with some of this. This isn't a guy he hasn't lost control of the ship. This isn't the Green Bay Packers with Mike McCarthy, and you need to make these wholesale changes, of which they appear to have worked this season, but we'll see if they continue to work into the future. We don't know what's still going to happen the rest of this postseason with that team, but they were kind of miserable the last few seasons, some of that with injuries to their franchise quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, who, by the way, this is a great segment to just – can I go on to the quarterbacks now?
Oh, sure. Let's do that.
Let's do that because I want to bring up Mason Rudolph. Everybody's like, I can't believe he'd be the 2. Why don't you get a veteran quarterback? Do you know he is a veteran quarterback now? The guy has experience, and he's cheap. I hate to say it because, like some of these young men, I want to see them make their money, but there's only so much money to go around, especially when you're paying Ben Roethlisberger. People are like, wow, it looks bad just because he didn't play this season, but to get him to that, the magic 30 million mark like some of these other guys, that's where the NFL is headed. Instead of waiting like a year or two and then paying them even more money, they got kind of ahead of the trend here, and I think that's okay. Speaking of Ben, let's talk about Ben real quick before I get on to the backups and the other people that don't want Ben, people that want to trade Ben, people that don't think Ben's going to come back or at all just because he's going to quit. And he basically came out on Christmas morning, Christmas Eve, and said to the opposite of whatever on his social media.
Yep.
So Ben Roethlisberger has not gained 50 pounds, people, or 100 pounds or anything like that. He has not had, the Tommy John surgery. It was a different kind of procedure. Oftentimes when you have dings and dents or things like this, who knows if this is something that he doesn't even know has been ailing him for a season or two. Could come back stronger. He's never not shown a commitment. People are like, oh, well, he doesn't work out in the offseason. Just because he doesn't throw a ball, you got to understand, how many throws do you have in your arm before it turns into spaghetti? It's an odometer. He saves that part for when it's necessary, even during training camp. He has the right to. He's been playing forever. He's 37. He's going to be going on 38. He's, this isn't like the horse you're taking out the pasture just yet. So just because he has a thick beard and he might be wearing multiple layers because it was cold outside, the guy's still in pretty tremendous. He's keeping himself in shape, and I think everything will just be fine. Now, if he comes back and he's rusty, not the same player, those are the things we really don't know know at this point, but it doesn't mean that you have, not that the Steelers have a lot of cap space to begin with, but it's not that you go out and then all of a sudden sign like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, or Teddy Bridgewater is still under contract to the Saints. Derek Carr, who makes a ton of money, and we've made fun of that, last year or the last couple of years in offseason programming. Those guys aren't available. Just stop. Who are you going to get otherwise? You're looking at people like Brian Hoyer, and you're really talking about paying or spending money for a position that might not see the field next year if Ben's 100%. And you also spent a draft pick in some, you spent snaps, you spent practice time and 2 training camps in a guy that you drafted that you felt had a first-round grade that could still be, and I know you don't agree that he's the future, but you still have to, you just don't like throw that away right away. You know what I mean? And now he has some experience, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but this whole Ben Roethlisberger thing, trading him, cutting him, releasing him, saving money, doing this, doing that. If you want what you had this year, next year, that's how you get that next year, is by getting rid of Ben.
Yeah, look, for the folks, for the Ben haters out there, they've probably been Ben haters all along. And unfortunately, throughout his career, he's provided people with the opportunity to be haters. But that all being said, this is a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback, and if you don't buy that, then I don't know what to tell you, because you don't understand how good he has been over his career and the things he has accomplished. As the quarterback of the Steelers, it's really not something I can explain to anyone. Even the professor would have difficulty getting through those knuckleheads who don't see that. So, that
Indeed.
being said, to say you don't want your Hall of Fame quarterback to give it a shot, look, we don't know. Nobody knows if he's going to come back just as good or not. We're not going to find that out until next year. And as we said, you look at the beginning of this season, and it's really reasonable to assume that this injury may have been bothering him from an early stage within this season, and it needed to be dealt with. So, you wipe out whatever you think of the beginning of the season and just say, let's see what happens next year. If he comes back and he's in shape and he is the kind of quarterback he has been, then you're now talking about a much different team, just because the quarterback is vastly improved. Because regardless of what you think of Devlin and regardless of what you think of Mason, none of those guys is Ben Roethlisberger right now. And whether either one of them could ever turn into that caliber of quarterback, you're right. That is speculation. You and I differ on our opinion on Mason, but I would be happy to be proven wrong.
Well, yeah, and I've got some statistics, even looking at a young Ben that we've mentioned too. But you know what this reminds me of? Everybody, Brian, we how many years have we been saying this same thing too? Probably since Ben kind of made a comment about whether he'd be back next year, like several years ago, losing in that 2016 season AFC title game, I think is when he made that comment. Maybe.
Yeah.
People think that you're immediately going to go from Peyton Manning to Andrew Luck. And I don't think they remember quite necessarily how that 2011 Indianapolis Colts team, how bad they were. I think people maybe even got fired on account of that. It went from Jim Caldwell to Chuck Pagano. They made some wholesale changes. Okay, they had the top pick and they got Andrew Luck. They're lucky Andrew Luck ended up being whatever he was. Now they don't have him either. Now that they're a franchise questioning a lot of things. But 2-14 under Curtis Painter, Dan Orlovsky, Kerry Collins, that's what they had in their coffers, aside from Peyton Manning. And they weren't sure if Peyton Manning is going to come back from, a neck surgery or whatever. And then he comes back and he's setting the world on fire. And I understand, Peyton was getting up there in age also. It drives me insane that people just think that the heir apparent immediately is going to step in. And that's where I'm at, even with Mason Rudolph, or, making any of these assumptions about what Ben's going to do and things of that nature. So you start to you start to look at some of the statistics, and I know it's statistics. I know you got to have some of the eyeball test and stuff too in order to do this. But I remember, a lot of people like to make the comparison too with Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. That didn't happen overnight either. You had 3 years where Aaron Rodgers only played in or appeared in 7 games. He was 35 of 59 in those games, 59.3 completion percentage, 329 yards, 1 TD, and 1 pick. Those aren't exactly the numbers that make you. A lot of people were thinking whether or not that guy was going to be a bust. There was a lot of, it was a bone of contention because Favre still wanted to play and things of that nature. He was up there in age, and they kind of forced him out, and they went with it. And how happy was the Packers fans that first year with Aaron Rodgers as a starter? Well, he completed 63.6% of his passes. He threw for over 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns to 13 picks, 93.8 quarterback rating, and the team went 6-10. And I'm sure people were like, what on earth are you doing? As you know, Brett Favre moves on, and eventually the Vikings end up doing good. He had a stint with the Jets, but who doesn't go to the Jets? He's one of the few guys that goes to the Jets and continued his career afterwards. That guy just isn't always going to be there, and you don't know right away if that guy is going to be the guy. It's very rare that you get somebody like an Andrew Luck who steps in and is throwing all over the field and is good. We're seeing that with last year's quarterback class. I mean, I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, man, look at the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. What's Lamar averaging passing? Like 75 yards a game or something like that? He's not necessarily – that is a rushing attack, and like a rushing attack we haven't seen in the NFL in like 30 some years, if even then, back in the 70s. So, I mean, it's just, come on, these comparisons, I don't know, man. It's like, even if you take the top picks, we've talked about guys who have busted out. What's Josh Rosen doing these days? He can't even win a job over Ryan Fitzpatrick, or he can't win a job on 2 of the worst teams in the NFL over the last few years in the Cardinals and Dolphins. Nothing is ever surefire there. So when I take a look at, I was talking about Rodgers here, and we were talking about completion percentage. You have Mason Rudolph, who's had 8 starts and played in 10 games, and he has a better rating. He has a better completion percentage. He's thrown far more passes because Rodgers only threw 59 passes, right? So he's at 283. He's about half there. 13 TDs, 9 picks, and 82 rating. 5-3 as a starter so far. You compare one more I got for you, Brian, is I love to do this all the time. I bring up Charlie Batch because everybody wants Charlie Batch. They want that great veteran backup quarterback who could go in and win you games. Well, that's all great. You got to have a good defense because Charlie Batch in 33 games, with 9 of those being his starts, 59.4 completion percentage, 2,069 yards, nice, a dozen TDs, a dozen picks, a 79 rating. His numbers are very much almost in line, except he threw for more yards somehow on just 5 fewer attempts. But he didn't complete as many passes, so something's telling me that those guys that he had on the field, Hines Ward, Randall L., who are some other guys? Mike Wallace he had at times, even AB. It's a whole world of difference, and the defense really helped carry that too. So when you're talking about, hey, he threw a dozen touchdowns to a dozen picks, I'm not ready to write Rudolph necessarily off just yet. And we're not talking about him being the starter next year. That's the real reason I'm not going to write him off. This guy's got time. He's under a rookie contract. It costs you nothing. He's not going to get cut. He's not going to get released. That's more or less where I'm looking at it from. And plus, and I've said this before, the eyeball test for me, I think his ceiling's a lot higher than what Landry Jones was. I think if you don't have the type of season where he gets knocked out, and he misses time, concussion protocol, then he comes back. That messed him up, number one. Then he gets benched. He comes back off the bench. It looked like he had something to prove. I think giving this guy a breather is going to be good for him. And then if he gets to sit and learn a little more behind Ben, he's already gotten a taste of NFL action. So he's not going to be as, I think, raw or have that deer in headlights type thing if they ever had to rely on him again. And hopefully if they ever do, you're only talking about, hey, Ben's sitting out for a game or two, something happened, somebody rolled his ankle, one of those things again, which is the same thing as Batch. And then I think with the way the rest of the team's structured, barring any major injuries to skill position players or, the way the defense is now set up, I think they can hang with anybody. You know what I mean? So there's no reason to get rid of the guy just yet. We have time.
Oh, yeah, and I even as much as I don't think Mason Rudolph passes the eyeball test for me, I don't think he can. I don't. Let me state this clearly, since I'm failing to do so.
I know where you're getting at.
I don't think he's going to be a franchise quarterback. That's just my take on this. I'd be thrilled to be wrong. I do think he can be a high-quality veteran backup quarterback for a number of years, a guy who can potentially win a game when he comes in. What I don't think is he can lead this team on a consistent basis. And again, that's just my take after seeing what transpired this year. And I'm not pretending, even though I am always right, I'm not pretending that I am definitely right. I would be happy to be wrong. It just never happens that way. So, I don't actually want to get rid of Mason Rudolph. I'll be quite content to keep him as the number 2. I think that's the best place for him to be right now. And if they keep him longer than his rookie contract, at least they have a sense at this point of what maybe he can be. What is he going to provide to this team? But as long as Ben's there, Ben's the guy until Ben proves that he shouldn't be the guy. So from the quarterback standpoint, people are floating scenarios left and right about the quarterbacks they need to draft in the upcoming draft. If they draft a quarterback, and I said this in the back rooms, I am going to drive to Pittsburgh and smack Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert right in the face and go, what in the world are you doing? I don't care if Joe Burrow, as I said, does something on social media that causes him to drop to the second round. Don't draft a quarterback. I don't care.
I mean, I think that's a little facetious, Brian. You are talking about Joe Burrow,
I don't care. No.
It would have to be, well, we're talking about the guys that really are available in the second round or beyond, and it's like, why are you going to they have 5 quarterbacks under contract right now, and I'm curious to see how this plays out because they had signed Paxton Lynch to a 2-year deal, so he may come to camp, doesn't mean he will. JT Barrett was signed to a futures contract. That's kind of interesting, so we'll see where his talent level lies because he came in with the Saints undrafted. He may have been somewhere else too, and, hasn't stuck around in those quarterback rooms. And you still have Duck Hodges, who's an experienced guy who, for all intents and purposes can learn and grow too. He was thrown into the fire. And I would not mind having him and Rudolph on the roster for another 2-3 years, backing up Ben until we find out, hey, Ben is old now, and he's in his 40s, and he wants to walk off into the sunset. Well, guess what? A whole lot of other guys probably will by that time, too. Like I said, you go back and play like a video game or just look at an opening season roster for the Steelers. Go back, 3-4 years. These teams, that's a lifetime we're talking about. So enjoy the short window. There's no reason to cut those guys. I don't know what they're going to do with the quarterbacks. We'll talk more about that and more in depth. I want to jump on to some of these other things too, which would be cutting James Conner, the running back thing. Well, we need a quarterback. We need a running back. It doesn't mean the Steelers won't, look at those positions, depending on what they end up doing with some of their impending free agents here, most notably Bud Dupree, is going to dictate a lot of what they need in the draft. But the Steelers always set themselves up in a position where they don't necessarily have to reach and pigeonhole or shoehorn a specific pick to a specific position and hope a specific player falls there, and then when they don't have that specific player, maybe reach on one. And I understand maybe they have in the past. Maybe they have on Burns. Maybe they have on Edmonds. Edmonds is the bigger question mark because the guy has all the intangibles of he may have still gone to one of those other 4 or 5 teams after the Steelers picked. So let that go. And for the other thing with Edmonds, and people were like, well, they need to get rid of him and replace him with somebody else. Why? He's under contract for 2 more years too. Go look at Ryan Clark, folks. You guys have such rosy memories of everything that goes on with Clark and Polamalu. Clark was made to look silly sometimes, and when Clark wasn't on the field, guess what happened? That Tim Tebow thing in the playoffs after the Steelers had a great season because Ryan Clark had the sickle cell thing. So don't necessarily trash Edmonds yet. Quietly, leads the team in tackles. People are like, oh, he misses tackles. Well, he's usually the first guy to come up and make the contact. That's going to happen. It's just a volume thing. Maybe he's not the top guy in coverage, but he's playing along a wild card just the same way Clark did. I know Clark hit like a a bus. I didn't want to say bus again, but the guy hit
one
hard.
One of those brick house things that has a bad word in them.
Yeah, the outhouse, the brick outhouse. So,
yeah,
but Ryan Clark would be fined every week if he were playing in the this era of NFL. So
fined, he'd be suspended.
That's true. He'd be out like completely. So I mean, but it's it's the system. You know what I mean? This is what I'm talking about: scheme and system. Now back to that scheme and system. I understand you're probably not going to want to go out on a limb and offer a long-term Le'Veon Bell type of deal to James Conner because you don't know that he's going to be available. Unfortunately, and this isn't something that he can necessarily prevent that I know of, Brian, injuries. I'm never going to hold injuries against a guy, but at the same time, you can't necessarily depend on if he's going to be there. Now, what you can depend on is he's under contract for one more year. Running backs take that leap in the second year, so you got Benny Snell. I know how you feel about that too. And then you got Jalen Samuels. You got 3 guys on the roster right now. How much more crowded are you going to make that? Maybe you draft somebody. If that certain somebody is there and somebody you're going to develop or you're going to move on. I mean, they did this with Connor behind Bell. Don't expect the guy to get a whole lot of carries. I didn't think Snell would have if it wasn't for Connor getting hurt. But to say you're going to release the guy, why? There's absolutely no reason to make that type of knee-jerk reaction right now. And people are saying the same thing. Some of them are going as far on a limb with Juju as well, too, and just not understanding how quarterback play and his own nagging injuries and things affected this season. And as far as I'm concerned, for as many of the people, there was a competitor's site that made a joke about Dante Moncrief, and he's in New York dropping the ball for New Year's. I don't understand why those same jokes don't apply to Juju Smith-Schuster. Maybe just because he's more beloved. Maybe he had proven more, in previous seasons. But there's no reason to not believe that he will rebound from that. He's another guy that's still under contract. Let's stop with all of this nonsense. There's a decent wide receiver room that's there. The same difference goes with like Ryan Switzer. Get rid of that bum. You know what I mean? Come on, he got hurt. He had a role when Ben was out there, at least. They used a lot more with the slot receivers and stuff, which I think goes back to us talking about, hey, one of these quarterbacks doesn't want to throw across the middle of the field, being Duck Hodges. How do you use a guy like that? Or even an Eli Rogers? So I think those are the type of guys that still come to camp. Whether or not they're there on the 53, there's a whole lot of time between now and around the end of August before those decisions are made.
There are. You unloaded a lot of stuff.
I did. Well, I was trying to get through the offense, more or less.
All right. Here's my James Conner take. And I agree with you. I don't hold injuries against a guy, and sometimes it's just happened. But the style that James Conner runs with, which is a bruising, I want to run you over kind of a back, clearly in the 3 seasons he's been around, he spent a lot of time in the tub, as they say. The best ability is availability, and he has not had it. And while I have no idea if there's any truth to him being snake bit with injuries or things like that, I look, as you said, what are you going to do? Wrap the guy up in foam to protect him? It just they already wear enough pads. I think it's just a function of the way his style is. And what I expect is James Conner will be in camp because there's no reason for him not to be in camp. He's still on a rookie deal. But I would also expect that the likelihood of them extending him is slim to none. Unless he turns around next year and has an absolutely phenomenal year, stays healthy the whole year to prove that he can stay healthy for an entire season, I don't expect them to keep James Conner around. And as much as we love the story, as much as we like the guy, and he's a great guy. I've met him twice now. He's a great guy, and a great inspiration. But that doesn't mean that you keep a guy around just because of that. He has to be able to contribute, and when he's on the field, he certainly does contribute. If he can't stay on the field, you got to start looking elsewhere. Brings us to Benny Snell football. I like Benny Snell. I want to keep Benny Snell. I do not think Benny Snell is a feature back. I don't think he's going to be the guy. But again, even though I'm never wrong, I hope to be proven wrong.
Well, and I don't want to get too far on performance reports and grading everyone's season just yet, because, geez, I mean, every position could almost be an episode all itself. But I think the main reason you can't, a lot of people are going to read into the Connor thing too that don't understand the football. The Steelers do not have money at this point. They're going to raise
absolutely not.
They're going to raise the cap some. They're going to have to do some finagling, probably with either, once again, Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, the higher paid guys, maybe Joe Hayden, Ben, of course. A lot of people don't understand. Well, the Antonio Brown money, isn't that coming off the books? Yeah, that's already kind of accounted for. And I think the Steelers are really up against this for one reason, Brian, and that's because a new CBA is going to get hammered out soon. And I think players are going to get paid more money. They're going to get a larger – they're always looking for the larger share, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of things happen with that, and that's the reason why the Steelers are where they are. Defensively, I think what they do is I think there's going to be a fifth-year option on TJ Watt, and they're going to let that sit. And I think Bud Dupree could even be franchise tagged, and they may even let that sit. And then they could always tag him again, and hopefully he doesn't pull a bell and everything else. But he said he wanted to be back. Tomlin said he's a top priority. And then everything else, it's just, man, it's like you're looking for coins in your couch cushions in order to do anything. And they may even have to do that for Dupree, let alone anything else that goes on. And some of that has already come to surface. People are like, well, cut Anthony Chickillo. Well, his contract does scream he may not be back. Cut Vance McDonald. Well, he doesn't make... what is he, like 20th in tight end salary? Who are you going to get? Because Vanette's going to be on his way out. That's the reason why they didn't sign Jesse James. Jesse James got a healthy contract, probably making more than McDonald, believe it or not, and probably not getting used very much, or he hadn't done a whole lot in Detroit. We'll say that much, at least statistically. So we'll see how much he's liked and if he's even coming back to that team. But they'll have a lot of dead cap if they get rid of him in this offseason. But stranger things have happened. But I mean, these are the kind of things that I'm reading all over the place where people are like, cut this guy, cut that guy. There's only so much that makes so much sense. If you cut Vance McDonald, you have to replace him with somebody. They don't have anybody. Vanette's going to be a free agent. They would have to try and bring him back. They have Zach Gentry. That's it. Xavier Grimble is long gone, folks. He's with the Colts on a reserve or whatever contract too. The Steelers had seen enough, and he was placed on. I think he was originally going to go on IR, and then he was waived with injury settlement or whatever. You got to have somebody to replace. I mean, the Ramon Foster one kind of sticks. They may have somebody to replace. They might not. A little bit, but they're going to lose B.J. Finney too. So they got a whole lot of tackles. Matt Filer, who's been playing right tackle, he's got some guys waiting in the wings behind him. Zach Banner, you got Chuck Secora that could compete. They could draft people. Derwin Gray's another guy that signed a reserves thing that they're trying to develop. So there's things there which might lend more to that kind of move, and we can get into more of that later in the future. But it's not just you just can't cut anyone and everyone. Replace them with an equal or better quality player, or even draft anyone because you don't have a first-round draft pick. So it doesn't mean you're not going to draft a quarterback and a running back and blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? So there's certain priorities there. I think most of the defense is set. We're going to get into some of the free agents that are impending in the future. It's why we mostly covered the offense because offense was the glaring issue, obviously, without Ben Roethlisberger, without some of the other guys. But they have enough of these guys, Ben and Juju and Connor, and that are under contract coming back. I don't think this is like where you sound all the bells, whistles, and alarms. You really just have to make room for maybe somebody like a Bud Dupree, maybe even a Mike Hilton if you could. You're going to have to let a couple people walk and start to fill in those positions with other guys that have been on your roster or cheaper free agents or some type of draft picks. You're going to do some of that. That's the carryover you have each year. But this doesn't mean you just wipe the board. You get the whiteboard and you're just wiping everything off. Mike Tomlin's name, goodbye. Randy Fichtner, goodbye. Keith Butler, goodbye. We're going to get rid of all the coaches. We're going to get rid of Ben. We're going to get rid of Ramon Foster and Vance McDonald and James Conner. And then what do you have? You don't have a better offense than you did. You don't have a better coaching staff, I don't think, than you did this season. So pump the brakes. Stop being stupid, Steelers Nation.
I got to get my Ryan Switzer say in.
Go for it.
I just got to. Look, if Ryan Switzer doesn't ever suit up for the Steelers again, I'm not upset. I'm just telling you.
Not necessarily.
I'm not upset. Does Ben like him? Yes, Ben likes him. That is great. But yeah, I've seen enough of Ryan Switzer. I don't mind if he comes to camp and he changes everybody's mind. Okay, but Deontay Johnson clearly is a more dynamic punt returner in even the brief amount of time that we saw him doing so. And without that for Ryan Switzer, I don't see a role for him right now. So while he may come to camp, and I wish him nothing but the best because, again, he's a great guy. But, yeah, I don't need to see him in black and gold anymore.
Well, but what are we talking about here? Are we talking about wide receiver 1? Wide receiver 2?
We're talking about wide receiver 6.
Exactly. So if he's
but
there,
they're not going to keep that many. So.
It's a rookie deal. He's still on a rookie deal for one more season. Like if he gets beat up by somebody in camp, or they only keep 5 wide receivers and he's the odd man out, then so be it. It will not break my heart. That's kind of where I'm coming from with it. There's no reason to send him packing unless they know he doesn't fit their plans, and then they do the professional thing and let him seek free agency. Early on. That's the thing that could happen.
What I anticipate is that.
But they didn't do that with Eli Rogers. Eli Rogers came to camp.
He did. And I think they'll let him come to camp. That's what I'm saying. I think they'll let him come to camp. And then I think they'll say, thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, okay. But
I think will happen.
And I'm not disagreeing with that. I mean, I'm not going to plant my flag saying that a wide receiver 5 or 6 is making the roster necessarily, and especially since they went out and got Deion Kane, and they'll probably draft somebody. They always draft somebody to see what they're throwing darts. They're always going to throw a dart like on day 2 or 3 and bring somebody in that maybe fits a certain role that they're looking for. Deontay Johnson ended up proving a lot of naysayers wrong in the draft, during the draft time, and everybody was like, well, I had this guy as like a day 20 pick. You know what I mean? And you're always going to have some of that. And, we'll get into more of that because, you look at what's there. I'm already thinking out loud here. You got Juju, you got Deontay, you got James Washington, and then you got, theoretically, you would have Switzer and Deion Kane. I'm not really looking at Amora Darboh or some of these other guys that were hanging around. Tevin Jones is already, on his way. We actually thought he wasn't even going to be around much longer on the practice squad because his eligibility was basically up. And, we're forgetting about Johnny Holton in that too. And there's a guy that's been like, he's kind of Xavier Grimble-ish, but he did have a role on special teams where Switzer has definitely lost that role. And it's like, availability and flexibility are things that Mike Tomlin and his staff definitely covet. So we'll see where we go from there. And, we didn't even mention, there's other running backs, too. There's Kareth White. There's Trey Edmonds. I mean, there's a lot of different things here. There's a lot of quarterbacks that got to play. They've played the most amount of guys have seen offensive snaps, I think. I only went back 5 years, but I would venture to guess that unless you went back to one of those years where there was 3 quarterbacks who played, that maybe even not then, how many guys took at least one snap on the offensive side of the ball for the Steelers? This may be the most in Mike Tomlin's career, I would venture to bet, or it's up there. And I guarantee you, because I looked up the last 5-6 years, it's the most in the last 5-6 years. They had 40-some guys that took a snap. You only have 53 players on a team. That just tells you how chaotic this season was. So this is to talk everyone off the ledge. Settle down. I know you're going to watch some games this weekend, and you're going to be a little irritated. Still wear your Steelers stuff. I don't care. Rub it in everyone's face. There's only one other team that has 6 Super Bowl trophies in their cabinet, and they're going to probably lose this weekend, and they cheated to get the ones they have anyways. So, so I got to bring that up, Brian. So Titans and Patriots. What do you think here?
Look, I don't know what will happen, but based on last week's performances, you have to like the Titans.
Yeah, they're on fire. Ryan Tannehill is playing like nobody has in ages. He's completing a crazy amount of passes. A.J. Brown is a freak in nature. I shared that picture in the back rooms. The guy is he's chiseled, man. You thought DK Metcalf was a specimen. Holy crap. And this guy's been making the plays, too. You got Derrick Henry, who's just a beast. They're playing good. They're on both sides of the ball. And you got a former Patriots assistant that's the head coach. He knows how to beat them. They already have during his coaching tenure. I know it's hard to go up and win in New England. They look like they were running out of steam. They usually don't lose 2 in a row. That was made to be a myth last year when the Steelers ended up beating them. I kind of give the edge to Tennessee. They're a hot team with a chip on their shoulder, and when you got momentum like this, we've seen the Steelers do it as a sixth-round seed. We've seen the Giants do it as a sixth-round seed. Does Ryan Tannehill have the magic touch? I don't know. It's going to be tough sledding, though, against some of these other teams. Two of the other teams, we got by the way, I got the Titans, so we both have the Titans. Buffalo Bills and Houston Texans. Got another Patriots assistant here in Bill O'Brien. I think he's going to be on the hot seat after this one. They're such a hot, cold team. I know they're getting J.J. Watt back. You got the Buffalo Bills. That has been, and now they're 2 out of the 3 seasons under Sean McDermott, making the postseason. They got a stout defense. This is going to be an intriguing game. I think it really comes down to what the Buffalo offense can do against the Texans. The Texans are a team like me, like other AFC South teams in the past that have flopped, like the Colts. I could see them losing this game at home too. This one's a coin flip for me, but I'm going to go with Buffalo. I got to go with Buffalo, and it would make me feel better if Buffalo won, too, just based on them having beat the Steelers. I tend to side with some of the teams that the Steelers lost to, because then it makes me feel better about the Steelers season and some of their results.
Well, I'm a defensive guy, so I like defensive teams. So I would like Buffalo to win. I don't think I picked Buffalo to win, though. And I'll tell you why. Because I flipped a coin. And it came up Texans. And because I don't know what Texans team is going to show up at this game.
Oh, I know.
I just don't know. So I took the offside of this and said, all right, it's at home. They're getting J.J. Watt back. Let's see. I'll flip the coin, and it came up. I ended up taking the Texans. But in this instance, I am not going to be at all surprised if that's not what happens. Because if the Texans that lost some of the games that they lost show up, they're going to lose to this team too. And I kind of like the Bills, and I like their defensive unit a lot. So I would be fine with having that happen. I'd love it if both the wild card teams won this weekend. Just because I think that'll be more fun. I split it. I have the Titans, but I think I took the Texans. I could be wrong. You can look and see.
I'm not going to bother, but it's just weird. I mean, they beat the Patriots and lose to like the Broncos, And I like Deshaun Watson a lot. Josh Allen's been pretty good too, but the Bills, I don't know, man. They just something. Frank Gore, he deserves more. But, I mean, you want to talk about like an offense that sputtered. And I understand last week against the Jets, they didn't play some of their guys. They only scored 6 points. But, against the Patriots, the Steelers, and the Ravens, those are all 17-point games. Sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
From the offense? It sounds like the same thing the Steelers were going through, except, they got to they were able to make it all the way. And in fact, I do think it was basically a playoff game when that was played at Heinz Field for Sunday Night Football. So the NFC games, oddly, both being played on Sunday. Usually they split them up, but I'm not sure if there's record or however they figured this out. Maybe they flip a coin too. Vikings and Saints, and then Seahawks and Eagles. And I'm going to say I got to go with Drew Brees here. You know that I'm picking the Saints. I think this is Drew Brees' last ride. I know that they still got whatever team's got to still probably play the Packers and the 49ers. But you know what? I like the Saints here. I think they're the total package this season. They have everything. And Michael Thomas is a hell of a player too. He's not the same guy that was Matthew Thomas, so I used to always get him screwed up with the Steelers. But you know what I mean? The Vikings got to go on the road. It's a tough place to play, the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. So I'm going with the Saints.
I think I've already said this. I want the Saints to win it all. I want this to be Drew Brees' ride off into the sunset moment. I want him to be able to stand on the podium and say, okay, I'm done. I've done everything I need to do. I've got 2 Super Bowls. I'm done. And I think he deserves that kind of moment for the quality of play he's given over the years. Plus, they got Michael Thomas, and that's the Ohio State University. So I kind of got to go in that direction.
Their whole secondary is Ohio State.
Yeah, I know. Their whole secondary is Ohio State. There's a lot of Ohio State guys to root for there. I want the Saints to win, and therefore I will be picking the Saints until they don't win.
Well, and then you got the Walking Dead wild card game between the Seattle Seahawks and the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's amazing the Eagles limped in the way they did with losing to everybody: wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, offensive line, maybe even defensive linemen. I know cornerback was a problem at one point, and now the Seahawks are losing. They're dropping like some flies too. They lose a guy like Chris Carson and some others. They brought Beast Mode back. That's a feel-good moment. They had that shootout with the 49ers where I think they kind of got screwed. So Russell Wilson's like my favorite non-Steeler, man, so I got to go with the Seahawks. I know they're on the road in Philadelphia, but I think Philadelphia, I think they just finally run out of steam here. And I know you're probably picking this way for an obvious reason. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm picking the Seahawks so that these people will shut the hell up.
Which would be fine. And I mean, it just kind of sucks. You have to think if the Steelers played in the NFC East, they would be in the playoffs and they would be hosting a home game. So stranger things have happened. You know what I mean? But
look, for those who don't know, I live in Eagles territory. And so I just want them to be done. Thank you.
Your brother's an Eagles fan too, right?
My brother, also probably dropped on his head, is an Eagles fan. But I really can't blame him. At least, he never was a fan of any other team. We moved out here. He moved out here, and he decided he was going to be an Eagles fan, and so he suffered a long time with that. And so I'll give him credit. He never varied. But I don't need the grief. So
well, and we both said we'd like to see the Saints win it all in the NFC. We didn't make the AFC pick necessarily because maybe they aren't playing this weekend. Do you think the Ravens go to distance?
There's no reason to think they don't at this point.
Good point.
That's the bottom line. Do I want them to? No. I would be quite much happier if Kansas City went.
I agree.
I'd be thrilled if the Bills or the Titans went because it would just be amusing to me. To be quite honest, the Bills got a chance, even though they kind of got walloped by the Ravens. They played them pretty good. You never know. With second time around, with some of these teams, there's an outside chance that something happens. And as we've said, look, the Ravens are right now, in my mind, if not the best team in the league, one of the top two teams in the league. Their running attack is just dominating everybody. Their defense is okay. It's not the same Ravens defense that they've had in the past, but it's good enough, and they still have a very good secondary. But that doesn't mean they can't be beaten. They weren't 16-0. And they could lose a game, and it wouldn't surprise me to have it come at the result of a fumble by the quarterback or an interception that comes at an untimely point. If it could happen, I will be rooting against them because I don't like them.
Yeah. Well, we've seen Kansas City beat them, and, that was a back and forth. That's what I think it's going to come down to is a shootout, and I guess that's where my pick is because it's a team that hasn't been in there for a while, and, watching Mahomes is a great player, too. They got a lot of dynamic guys like Tyreek Hill, and, I mean, they got guys that could definitely cause problems. You definitely have a battle-seasoned head coach in Andy Reid. It's going to be very interesting. I think that road definitely goes through Baltimore, and that's the reason why I think we're all writing off the Patriots already because there'll be somebody that somehow sniffs this, even though we're over an hour into the episode that we didn't want to go an hour. Somebody will be like, "Man, you are on crack if you don't think the Patriots are going to win it all." Look. They just lost at home to the Miami Dolphins. They don't have a bye. And for all intents and purposes, they're playing one of the hottest teams in football in the Titans, and they will have to go on the road to face the Kansas City Chiefs or the Baltimore Ravens, and maybe even back-to-back should they be able to win one of those games. That is a tall, tall order for anybody, even Bill Belichick, even the defense that they've had and the way they were playing, propped up, I think, by playing a lot of lousy quarterbacks and stinky teams. That's where I'm coming from with it. So don't hate
anybody who wants to hate me for not thinking the Patriots are going to go. Just look at how many times they've gone when they haven't had a bye. The answer is zero, none, nada. So history would play out that this ain't going to be the Patriots' chance to get 7, and I hope it's not.
Sounds good to me, Brian. So, hey, buddy, thanks for joining me once again. We're very much so up against it. Happy New Year to you, yours, and all of our listeners as well.
Absolutely. Maybe we have another decade of Steel City Underground podcasts to enjoy, and hopefully pick up some Lombardis along the way.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually been a pretty good decade, or was a pretty good decade. So our first show of the year, folks, if you got some ideas you want to hear on the show, don't forget you could always hit us up at fanmail at steelcityunderground.com. We also have the hotline. It's in the show notes. It's also over on the website if you want to check that out. There's a contact form there as well. Bringing in 2020, we'll be coming at you at least twice a week with all kinds of stuff, and maybe not always an hour-long episode, but again, we had some airing of grievances in this unorthodox Festivus episode where we tell everyone to stop being stupid, silly, and just nonsensical.
Yes.
Yep. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as we always say, my name's Joe. His name's Brian. We tell everyone to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.